Well, since my Realm Royale videos seem to be doing so good, I decided I'm going to keep that momentum going. Let's talk about this. Hey everybody, what's going on? Brandon here, and since my Realm Royale videos have been doing so good since the console release, I decided I'm going to do this tips and tricks guide for new players to help new players that are just now getting into the game get a good start, get their hands dirty, get their feet wet a little bit, and kind of give them a good direction to go and to learn this game a little bit easier. Now, this does apply to all versions of the game since they will be having the same version on all platforms along with cross-platform at the end when this is all finally up to date on all the systems. So this does apply to all versions of the game, whether it will be PS4, Xbox One, or PC. Now, with that being said, this guide could eventually become outdated depending on what kind of changes hi-rez makes to the game later. So if they make huge changes later, I may have to update this video and do a new one. So if something in this video doesn't make any sense, look at the date on it. It might not be up to date. So with that being said, let's get started. Now, first things first is picking the right class. Now, this is going to take a little bit of tinkering and a little bit of time because you're going to want to play as each of these classes to figure out which one's the best one for you and which one best reflects your style. Now, you can read the class descriptions in the main screen whenever you go in to join a game to choose your class. So I highly recommend reading all these, reading them over carefully. That way you know which class might be the best one for you to start out with, but I do recommend trying them all out to figure it out. Your class will determine what kind of weapons you can forge, what kind of abilities you can forge that are all class specific, as well as what kind of weapons you are best with. And this can play a huge role in the game, especially in squad mode where you can actually focus on teamwork. The next thing is the drop. Now, you're going to want to start dropping in several different locations to figure out what your favorite place to drop is. I highly recommend dropping in places that have normally a lot of chests spawn. That way, even if you don't get the weapon that you really want, you can break down enough items to get shards so that hopefully you can forge a weapon really early in the game. This comes in very handy, especially if you play a class that has a weapon that you really enjoy and that you're really good with. That way, even if you don't find a weapon in a chest or find a legendary drop early, you can usually find enough common and rare items that you can break down, have enough shards to craft the runes, the abilities, and the weapons you want really early in the game. Now, this is going to be a lot of trial and error at the beginning. You're going to want to keep dropping at different places until you find a good spot for either yourself or you and your squad to land and find a lot of loot chests. I've noticed places like Fungal Forest typically draw a lot of people to drop there, but I've also noticed that there's usually not a lot of chests there. So if you don't find a good weapon in those chests, sometimes there's not enough stuff there for you to break down to get enough shards, even be able to actually craft one early on. And a lot of times early in the game, if you're stuck with common weapons and somebody gets a little bit luckier than you in a gunfight, if they have something more powerful or stronger, you could die real early in the game. So I don't recommend landing at places that don't have a lot of chests, or if they do, they're scattered out to where you're having to do a lot of running. It's a bad idea because if you don't find something you really like, you could end up with a pretty much useless weapon and not enough shards to get you through to the end game. I've actually noticed a lot of unmarked places similar to the graveyard near Icehaven actually usually have a ton of loot chests that you can actually loot and usually find a really good weapon. If not, there's a forge in there and you can almost always have enough shards to forge not only a weapon but some armor potions as well as maybe even a rune, depending on if you have other people drop there that you can take out early on. So if you land somewhere like that, I suggest landing near a chest you can see from the air, looting it, hopefully getting a weapon early on. That way you can take out people as they land near you. So look for places that you might not even suspect have a lot of weapons, because a lot of times the places you don't expect usually end up having the most chests. Next up is stick with what you're good with. Now, I highly recommend practicing with all the different weapons to figure out which ones you're really the best with and get at least somewhat decent and practice a lot with all of them. But you will have a set of weapons that you particularly like more than others. Some people will prefer the hammer over the axe. Some people will prefer the venom pistol over the sniper rifle, or the sniper rifle over the heirloom, or the heirloom over a revolver, or a longbow over a crossbow. You want to stick with what you're good with. You don't want to just swap out a weapon because maybe you find something of higher rarity if you're not as good with that weapon. So if you're really good with a revolver and you're not so good with a longbow, maybe don't swap out the rare revolver for an epic or legendary longbow, because it's not going to do you any good if you're not very good with that weapon. So don't just swap out your weapons because you find something of a higher rarity. You can always break those items down to get the shards to maybe craft something class specific that you might actually like a lot more. So stick with what you're good with. Skill will always overpower rarity and strength of a weapon as long as you're better with that weapon than the enemy is with theirs. So always stick with the skills and abilities you're good with and that you're used to using. Don't just swap out weapons or abilities for something stronger if you're not very good with it. Next up is teamwork and team formation. You want to stay together, but you also don't want to stay bunched up. This applies for squads. If you're playing with 4 people and somebody drops somewhere you don't really want them to, but you can course correct and you all can meet up with them and stay with them, that is always better than just saying, okay, well, they went the wrong direction, we're going to go over here. Because no matter what, 4 players is always better than 3, regardless of skill level. So you always want to make sure you stay together. Now, with that being said, you don't want to stay bunched up. If you are all going around looting items, it's best to stay in groups of 2, but stay far enough away from each other where you're not all in one area so you can get ambushed, especially if you're at the forge. Sometimes it's better to forge 2 at a time. That way, whenever you're forging and other players can see that somebody's using the forge, you won't all get ambushed, and when you're all standing in one spot, get hit with maybe a fire grenade and a bunch of hammers and axes and just your entire squad wiped out real early on. I usually find it's better to stay in groups of 2, stay close enough to where if somebody does get attacked, you can get in to help them, or if you get attacked, your squad can come in and help you, but not so close together where you can all get took out all at once. You want to make sure your team members can at least flank the enemy if need be, and not be right on top of one another to where you're just an easy target for everybody. Next up, and I cannot stress this enough, do not grief your own squad mates. Do not be a bad team member. There is nothing more annoying than whenever you go and you get in this huge gunfight and you manage to kill somebody and they drop something you really wanted and your squad mate rushes in and breaks it down or takes it before you even get a chance to get over to where your kill was. That is very annoying. It's very bad teamwork. It's very bad for your team morale, so do not do it. It's not good. It just makes you look like an asshole. Don't do it. It's pretty simple. Also, do not steal your squad mate's items when they are at the forge. If your squad mate is forging something and one of your team members starts getting shot at and that squad mate runs over to save that team member and their stuff comes out of the forge, do not take it. That is a very, very, very crappy thing to do for your squad mates. This is your team. You're wanting to win the game. If they forge something, they cannot forge those items again at that forge because you can only forge items one time at a specific forge. So if you take all their stuff, they cannot forge anything else until they get more shards and go to another forge. So don't take your team members' stuff. It's a crappy thing to do, and it more than likely will just get you reported. Next up is runes. Do not take runes for granted. Sometimes it's easy to say, well, I'd rather have a weapon or an ability. I don't see really what good a minor passive buff with a rune will give me, but they can help turn the tides of a game, especially ones like passive repair buff, which will allow you to actually gain 20 points of armor for every second out of combat. Additional chicken health and chicken recovery can help you if you're downed. Even the headshot rune, which gives you an additional 50% headshot bonus, is great, especially for the assassin with an heirloom rifle who already gets a 25% damage buff with headshots. That's an additional 75% headshot damage compared to all the other classes if you have that rune. So do not take runes for granted. Sometimes it's better to forge a rune than it is a weapon, especially if you've got a weapon you're good with. Even if it's not the most powerful weapon, those runes can help turn the tide. There's been multiple times where I can go through a game and the runes are what make me as powerful and as good in the game and help me win over anything else. So do not take runes for granted. If you find a good rune, do not just break it down because you think you don't need it. It's always better to equip it and not need it in the end than not equip it and then find out it could have turned the tide in the end. So don't take runes for granted. Next is don't give up whenever you're chickened. It's real easy for new players, and even I did it a bunch when I first started playing, to get chickened and think, okay, well, I'm already screwed, and just give up. You can actually manage to get away and win even after being chickened more than once. I've been chickened twice sometimes in games and managed to still come back and pull out a win in both solo and squads. Yet even yesterday I was playing a game where my entire team was dead other than myself, and I was able to revive them with the Scroll of Resurrection. They stayed alive as chickens, and we still came back and won the game. It is doable. You just got to learn how to maneuver as the chicken. Understand that the chickens have smaller hitboxes. You can jump, you can maneuver, you can serpentine, you can go through windows. And also, chickens don't make as much noise when they sit still. So if you can find a good spot to sit still and hide, you'll make less noise and it'll be harder for the enemies to find you. So don't give up whenever you're chickened. You can still manage to pull out a win. Now next up is actually console specific. It doesn't apply to PC because it's already mapped on PC, but for whatever reason they did not map your loot menu or your inventory to any bindings in Realm Royale on console. They just didn't map it to anything. So you actually have to manually map it. And I didn't even think about this or know that I could map it to anything when I realized it wasn't mapped. But you can. You can actually go into options and go over to bindings and find, I think it's called loot menu in the options, and you can actually bind that to something. Now, in my honest opinion, the easiest thing for me to do was bind that to right on the D-pad and change your mount binding to clicking the left stick. The reason I did this and I felt it was easier for me to do this was because in a lot of first-person shooters, if you click the left stick, it will initiate sprint, and I just felt it was easier with the game already having auto run. You don't need to actually sprint. Clicking the left stick, it would initiate my mount for me to, mount up, and using the right on the D-pad will allow me to use my inventory menu. This I found to be very easy, as well as so when you're in a gunfight and you accidentally click that stick, it's really not that big of a deal. It doesn't take too long to get on and off your mount, whereas opposed to if you click the left stick and it accesses your inventory menu, it can kind of throw that off. So it's best to just go with personal preference here. If you have an elite controller, you can map these a lot easier and have a lot more variation with how you're going to map all the keys. But if you're just using a standard controller, it's, for my personal preference, it's easier to bind your mount to the left stick and your loot menu to the right on the D-pad. But it's personal preference. If you have a binding you would rather use, whether you're rebinding crouch to the left on the D-pad or right on the D-pad, or the left stick click, and you're just mapping everything around, you can move the bindings around to your personal preference. But it is a good idea to bind that loot menu because it does come in very handy, especially if you've got team members that might need stuff. And lastly, I'm going to finish off this list with farming nuggets. Now, you'll notice, at least right now in this console, you cannot buy anything with crowns because the crown store is not open. Now, I'm sure by the time some of you see this, that will have changed, but the main way to make skins or get skins for free in playing this game is to earn nuggets from playing the game. Now, the best way to do this actually is to farm them. Now, farming in solo is going to take you a lot longer than farming in squads. The reason this is, you get 10 nuggets for winning the game. You also get a nugget for each elimination, and then you can loot some throughout the game. Now, if you go through this with solo, you're only going to get a nugget for each elimination you get, but if you play squads, you will get a nugget for each elimination your entire squad gets. So if you're wanting to farm nuggets, it's better to play squads because you'll be able to farm a lot more, a lot faster. Winning games is a lot easier if you have a good squad, so getting that 10 bonus is a lot easier, as well as getting one for each elimination anybody in your team gets is also a nice bonus. It's easy to leave with about 20 to 30 nuggets per game, as opposed to 15 to 20 if you're playing solo and manage to pull out a win. It's just a lot easier to farm nuggets in squads, so if you're wanting to farm nuggets to get skins, I highly recommend finding a good squad to play with, or even squadding up with random sometimes works out pretty well. So, with that being said, I'm going to finish off this tutorial. I know I might not have covered a lot of stuff. This wasn't meant to be a how-to-go pro guide by any means. This is just simply some steps to take and some things to keep in mind when you're beginning this game, and how to just get a little bit better, a little bit faster, and start the game off strong. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to know anytime me and Nathan upload videos, please click that subscribe button as well as that bell icon, because YouTube has not been giving notifications out to our viewers. But thank you guys for watching, and I will see you all next time.